sit back in your seats, get something to eat, and watch this movie. Don't let the kiddies see it, because, well, we'll let you hear the beginning first. Thank you.
Hello and welcome to Left of the Projector. I am your host, Evan, back again with another film discussion from the left. I'm happy to announce that you can now sign up and be a paid subscriber to the show directly from Spotify, so you can just pop on there and support the show. Also, if you would be so kind as to smash that ratings button on Spotify, Apple Podcast, or wherever you're listening to this show right now. As always, you can follow the show on TikTok and Instagram at Left of the Projector Pod. Enjoy the show. All right, we will get into the discussion this week on the Coen brothers' Academy Award-winning movie No Country for Old Men. And joining me to talk about it is Commie Trucker. Thank you for joining me.
Hey, no problem. Glad to be here.
Awesome. So this movie, as we were briefly discussing before, is a Coen brothers movie, but you sort of, at first glance, you might not think of this as sort of their bread and butter. So I think as, their movies go, just from a general sense, it's quite a departure, and really has a sort of like a different aesthetic, I think, than some of their movies. But do you think it still feels like a Coen brothers movie?
Well, I think it's a deeply intelligent movie, and it's written incredibly well, and so that goes along with the rest of their work. It's much more bleak,
Yeah,
than the rest of their films. There's less humor in it, but there are points of humor, but it's the kind of humor you'd get in any small town America.
yeah. The feeling of this movie being, somewhat rural Texas, it's definitely
Mm-hmm.
not their. Well, I mean, I guess some of their movies do take place in sort of rural areas, but I think the setting of the movie too is just to mention as well. So it takes place in 1980. You think of 1980 America. Ronald Reagan is now president, and it's a different, very a changing culture. You could say it's changing financially for people, and I think the movie sort of takes you through that at the very beginning of a place where people are living very ordinary lives, and they sort of need something, or need some way out of this life. And so that's how I sort of was picturing sort of the main character, Llewellyn. He feels he's definitely trapped in his retired, as a welder, I think he says later in the movie. It depicts that rural life, I think, well.
Oh yeah, definitely. And it starts off with a monologue from one of the protagonists, the sheriff,
Yep.
and he's recounting how life used to be with the old timers. He talks about the old timers a lot in the film, and how he's always kind of looking for that idyllic past that's been romanticized, and he uses that to base kind of the rest of the film, like the violence and the carnage that ensues after that monologue. And he continuously you see him continuously comparing and contrasting the time before, the mythology of the time before, with present day, and the increasingly violence of contemporary times.
What's interesting about how he has several conversations throughout the movie, and always in a very, I think we said this, the humor is very dry. I feel like the sheriff, played by Tommy Lee Jones, he makes sort of jokes, especially I think to his deputy Wendell. They have
Yeah.
a kind of a funny, constant sort of running dialogue, but I feel like he kind of alludes to the violence, like he can't believe that it almost exists now. Like, oh, it's comical the way that violence is. I think he mentioned someone who he had the story about someone having a dog collar around their neck, and this is pushing way in, later in the movie. But he definitely has this he romanticizes so much about the past. I think he says like he didn't used to carry a gun, or maybe some folks didn't carry a gun.
Yep.
So
Sheriff's.
yeah, you didn't because there wasn't the violence. You didn't need them. Whereas now you've come to the point, and I think that where it kind of plays into it being 1980 and sort of the slow, the well, not the slow, the bigger decline of working class, middle class America.
100%. He had a line in one of his monologues. I just completely lost my thought. But yeah, he's always searching. He's always romanticizing his father and what his, at least more so in the book, I would say.
Mm-hmm.
But he's always comparing what his father and his grandfather would do as sheriffs, and then considering what's going on now and how they would process contemporary times.
Yeah, I have the script open is going through all of that, and he often in this movie talks about his willingness, or he always knew you had to be willing to die to do this job, and he wasn't doing it for glory or any of these things. I mean, for his family, obviously, it was sort of like a the family business, if you will, but it was sort of like he had to do this because if he didn't, there wouldn't necessarily be someone else there. But I think like police in general plays an interesting role. It's sort of, I mean, so you have to kind of set the stage for anyone maybe who hasn't seen it. It's sort of, I feel like the movie has the three sort of main protagonists, although I feel like Tommy Lee Jones's character is a little bit maybe less included, as you have Anton, who's sort of the hitman, sort of crazy person or a psychopath, as it's referred to occasionally. The one here, and then you have Josh Brolin, who's Llewellyn, and then you kind of have a couple side characters here and there. But it's sort of like this triangle, I think, that kind of constantly plays out through the movie, and
yeah,
I think you get the instant. He's talking about the violence and how things are different, and then the very first introduction to any other character in this movie is Anton and his sort of absolute violent behavior from the jump. Like there's no waiting. You're just immediately seeing violence.
He's almost the personification of the incoming contemporary times that's threatening to completely disrupt everything that the sheriff has come to cherish about the past. Here's
Right.
this unstoppable force that's just tearing through their town, almost through dumb chance, and it just completely upsets everything.
And not only that, but he's using like weapons that they don't even understand. Like he has his little gas canister where like it's almost he has to be using something so new because they don't even understand it. It's like it's incomprehensible to them, this level of violence.
Yeah, it's the modernization of violence as well.
Yeah, and the thing that's too, so like after sort of you get him sort of escaping from being arrested initially, and then he's sort of now kind of out again. The introduction you see, there's also some voiceover and sort of talking by other characters too. I don't think that Anton ever has any thoughts like that, but I think that Llewellyn has a couple voiceover, or he talks to himself sometimes, and it's really like a one of those movies. This is, I feel like, is very Coen Brothers-y, of someone stumbling upon something by chance. He's out hunting. He randomly comes. He sees this drug deal gone bad. He finds a suitcase full of money, and that to me is like very Coen Brothers-y. But for someone who's living this sort of rural life of he's very he's not wealthy. He this is like something once in it's like a jackpot, I think is the word that I wrote down. It's like the only way to get out of that life was some kind of jackpot, which is so rare.
And you'll notice that that he only sorry, the violence only came into his life after his conscience made him take water back to a survivor of the shootout.
Yes, he could. If he hadn't gone back, most likely the events don't.
Don't unfold it. Yes. So it's almost like the author Cormac McCarthy was saying that the world is going to um, bear down on you with um, with unknown circumstances whenever you whenever you follow your conscience and do good.
Yeah, he's like basically. I guess you're saying, why bother do good if it's just going to end up leading to death and horror, which I think plays into a theme that I noticed in this movie. I know maybe we can talk through some of the scenes too, but I think it made me think of just the idea that of kind of an emptiness and being willing to do whatever it takes, not really caring about. I mean, yes, Llewellyn, I think he cares for his wife, obviously Carla Jean, but he also, I feel like they all kind of have this nothing to lose attitude. The sheriff, I think, kind of has that mentality. Things are changing. I'm just gonna go through it. The same thing with Anton. He doesn't care about any consequences. Bullets don't matter. He's gonna get shot at. So it's this willingness to put everything on the line, because if you don't, you're just going to kind of get swallowed up.
The sheriff, Ed, he chooses to stay out of the oncoming whatever the contemporary society is bringing towards him. He has this nature about him where he's kind of standing back from it all. He's not pursuing it like Anton or Llewellyn. Like Llewellyn's in it. He knows what he has to do. The whole film is also kind of a kind of competency porn.
Yeah.
Because Llewellyn and Anton are both just like really competent, and they both know exactly what they're doing. And there's a pleasure in witnessing that. But Llewellyn, he's in it. He understands the world as it exists today, and he's willing to take those chances to
Right.
to be able to have the resources necessary to take care of his family the way he wants. Anton has this these scruples and principles that really only he understands.
Yeah. They're like kind of self-made guide, really.
Yeah, or that really speak to the world as it's changing at large.
Yeah.
And then
Yeah.
and then Sheriff Ed, he's refusing to go along with the world because he's old, he's almost retired, he doesn't like what he sees, and he says, and towards the end of the movie, I feel like I'm unmatched.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
so he's just kind of playing the witness to the unfolding of societal change.
Yeah, I think the line you said, which I think they mentioned in the movie later, is that Anton having principles,
Yeah,
whereas I feel like no one else really does, or if they do, it's more of society's sort of way of doing things, whereas he has these principles above money, above killing. I mean, all the things he's doing, and everyone is very confused by them. They don't really understand. When he meets Woody Harrelson's character later, Carson, he's doesn't understand what he's doing. He doesn't comprehend, because he's not really doing it for money, really. I mean, it's just this, if he doesn't do things his own way with this principled stance, you get swallowed up. And so I
yeah,
think that's, you could, as I, inject ideas of, capitalism in this too. It's if you don't, if you have principles in capitalism, usually it's the opposite. You will presumably fail because you have to go against the system. So it's kind of a his character is kind of a weird, I know, like floating in between the two somehow.
Well, it really kind of highlights even the title of the movie, No Country for Old Men, because I mean it really is just like an analogy for changing times and how the elderly, they're rooted in the past.
Mm-hmm.
That's that's bigger and better than what it really was, but the things are changing and the old are not changing with them, and they're all witness to seeing everything become unrecognizable.
Yeah, yeah. I wrote one of my notes down when I was looking at the title, as you said. I think I noted that the sort of the old ways are dying, and it kind of is encapsulated at the end of the movie when Tommy Lee Jones, the sheriff Ed, he retires. I think, like you said, he's not willing to go to change. Like it can't. He's unable to comprehend or willing to make the changes needed. Whereas Anton he's basically going headfirst into them. And actually, you don't get much character development on the deputy Wendell, but he's very eager to be involved, help the DEA and the other people involved in this case. And so, being a young deputy, he seems like represent that new generation that's going to presumably change or understand there's change.
Well, yeah, I mean it's like with any time in history, the young are going to be they're being raised inside the change, so they're not only witness to it, but they're part of the change itself.
But yeah, I guess going through the movie a little bit, we kind of we alluded to that Llewellyn's character stumbles upon this money. He's like you said, he makes this great gesture to bring water back to the lone survivor who needed water, and that kind of gets him into trouble. He now is now being chased by both sort of the cartel, presumably, I guess, and then as well as Anton. And so he immediately goes into this sort of survival mode. And like you said before, he's very competent. He knows how to survive. We learn later he fought in Vietnam. We don't I don't think Anton. Well, I guess Anton could have. They don't really ever mention if he had.
I think Anton intentionally doesn't have a past.
Right. He's very empty. It's sort of like a hollow shell of a human almost.
He's really just the horror that everyone is presented with, that no one.
Yeah, sort of like everyone has to now deal with this new threat, and
Yeah,
Llewellyn and the thing that I find ironic too, is that Llewellyn ends up dying, towards the end of this movie, but not at the hands of Anton. Anton isn't the one who eventually gets to
no,
him. It's the Mexican cartel, I believe. I
yes,
think Mexican, and so I feel like I almost kind of felt a little disappointed. I know we're jumping to the end of it, but I felt a little bit disappointed that
yeah.
that's how the sort of that triangle of the three of them kind of ends up. There's not like any direct conflict between them at the end. I don't know if you felt that
There's
way.
one shootout they had, which came to a draw essentially, because Llewellyn and Anton were both injured, but they both ended up walking away. And then yeah, it's just well, the Mexican cartel does uh, locate and kill Llewellyn, and then Anton is struck by a car in one of the final scenes of the movie, just out of sheer dumb luck.
Yeah.
So Anton does walk away, but it's testament to how everything is subject to the chaos of the universe,
Interesting. That's a good point.
and how I think a lot of the subtext of the movie is is people waiting for God and God never arriving.
Yeah, I'm trying to think about some of the other characters in the movie. I think even, and I think one of the things I'll connect them to a little bit. But one thing that Coen brothers do well in a lot of their movies, in this movie in particular, but in a different way, is that always you have like sort of the protagonists, main characters, always interacting with, I guess you could say, the common person, or just the store clerk, and other people in the movie, and they always
The
have
NP.
sort of yeah, right, exactly, and they have sort of these little nice little dialogues. In this movie, it's not quite as funny; it's a little more dry.
Yeah.
But I feel like that. I don't know why when you mentioned sort of they're waiting for God. I don't know why I thought of that. I lost my little.
I gotta say, I'm a huge Cormac McCarthy fan. I've been on a Cormac McCarthy kick the last few months, just rereading a bunch of his novels. And the best work that Cormac McCarthy does is the quiet moments between two characters. Just, a protagonist and his friend riding horses or breaking horses or having a campfire or talking in the store. Just it's those small quiet moments that Cormac McCarthy really shines. It's his violence and his realism that made him really popular. But it's the comfort of those quiet moments that I think he really shines. And a lot of the humor and the dialogue does shine through. The movie is surprisingly close to the book.
Well, I think you in a movie or a novel, either one, I guess, or a making of a novel into a movie, where there are those such violent parts. I think the only way to separate the two is to have those, like you're talking about, those sort of quiet dialogues and those little scenes where it's kind of brings you back to a more humane. I know in this movie Anton occasionally will, in a conversation he has, he might end up killing the person he might be talking to because of that's the character he is and what he
Yeah.
brings. But
But
you
he's
need that little break. I think of like horror movies where you need some humor, otherwise the horror is too much. You need some break in the pattern, and
yeah,
he seems to do it really well.
yeah. You need safety amidst the chaos.
So I guess as far as the movie is concerned, midway through, I guess maybe the end of the first act, give or take, is sort of once there's now the knowledge that Llewellyn has the money, and now Anton is sort of on his trail. He discovers the tracker and the money, which I'm surprised that Llewellyn
Llewellyn.
didn't look for something in the money initially. That was felt
Yeah.
like an oversight on his intelligence.
But at the same time, it is 1980.
True, that is true. Yes, I guess you don't. A surprisingly good technology for the era. I guess I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose.
I don't know
That
the yeah.
stuff. I was born in '82, and that wasn't really popular in contemporary culture, I guess, when I was growing up.
I think about like movies from late '80s, early '90s, where there's like a money or something like that, and usually I don't think that kind of thing exists. That maybe the CIA had this kind of technology they're using abroad, but it wasn't really
Well,
something you would think of.
yes. Speaking of old people getting left behind, we're both 40, aren't we?
Indeed, yeah, I just turned 40 a couple months ago. I assume you are as well, or I guess maybe you could.
June
June,
is
okay, yeah.
what.
Exactly. Yeah. So it's sort of, yeah, thinking of the old time. I mean, I think of in a lot of the movies. So this is not a new movie. This movie came out, I think, in 2008 or 2007. And was
Well,
thinking, oh, well, go ahead.
no, I was gonna ask, do you find yourself looking at? I mean, we're both terminally online, I assume. Do you find yourself looking at um like interactions between younger people and wondering and feeling like you are left out of place and you don't understand everything?
I think so, actually, in some senses. I mean, obviously, there's all kinds of different types of online spaces and, app spaces and tech spaces. And I think, I mean, I don't have kids that are maybe old enough that they don't have their own phones or anything like that yet, which, eventually will be coming. But the idea of, I feel like interaction amongst people in college, you look at people in college now, they're born just after the turn of the century. They're born 2000, 2001, 2002. I feel like they, living near a university, I feel like there is a different way they might be communicating. And that might even be a reason for being, in some of, like on TikTok or other spaces where, you almost don't want to be left behind. You want to be involved. You want to.
Well, yeah. I mean, nobody wants to be, well, nobody wants to feel like they are incompetent or they're, like you said, being left behind, or they don't fully comprehend the world as it's as it is and as it's progressing. But of course there are cultural things that at 40 years old we just don't comprehend, that we just don't get, you know. But I feel like a lot of that is also vanity, and that we want to be involved, we want to understand, we want to be one of the cool hip kids.
Yeah. Right.
But also it doesn't take away any meaning from our lives,
No,
you know.
no. I don't feel like comparing it to, Sheriff Ed as seeing, he's probably 60, 65 in this movie. So born, World War One era or so, give or take. Obviously it's a different era to move from. He's still in this sort of not a tech age, it's a different time. But I don't
Hmm.
feel like I look back and think of, the 90s or the late 80s or whatever you might say and see it in the same way that he's looking at it. I feel like, I feel like this our age sort of like splits the two in some way, where we
Hmm.
kind of had a glimpse of, you could say pre and post 9/11 kind of as a
Okay.
kind of a splitting point, if you will. I feel like that was a good, almost a moment in time that sort of separated
The
eras
before and yeah.
a little bit anyway, I think. Because I often talk about in this, a lot of the movies I've done on this show have been, movies that I like from the late 80s and 90s. And I'm always
Hmm.
saying, always joking about some of the technology in them, VCR, explaining a VCR or a payphone to like your kids, and they have no idea what you're talking about. They look like you're this old crazy loon explaining how you had to carry around, not before an iPhone. What was it called? The iTunes. Well, I can't even think what it's called.
Nokia.
Or no, I was thinking of like the original versions of iTunes, where you before the iPhone. I see. I can't even remember. It's been so long. It's been 15 years.
What, a Walkman?
Like a Walkman or a Zune or any of those things. Like they don't. That's like it's unbelievable for them to even to think about it. Where now everything is just I press a
You
button
had
and
to
everything is available.
throw your cassette tape in your Walkman.
Yeah, or a CD player. Even talking about CDs is like almost hard for them to understand.
Yeah, who buys CDs anymore?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I guess you could have the only thing I can compare it to is maybe you might watch a DVD. Is probably the
Yeah,
only situation where you might do that.
fair.
But yeah, so I mean, the movie, really, obviously, again, it's a different era that it's splitting. But I think
Hmm.
that 1980, and again, maybe I'm just saying that because that's when this movie takes place. But I feel like the late 70s into the early 80s was a very major turning point in so much of American life, culture, obviously the change of tax codes and Reagan and Reaganomics and the whole thing.
That's when unions started to really fold and
Yep.
started losing power
Yep.
as soon as Reagan came into office. And
Yep.
so you'll witness working class people becoming more and more desperate and willing to do more and more things to, preserve their life.
which I guess is sort of. I mean, maybe Llewellyn isn't exactly an example. He says he's retired, so presumably he's doing. He's
No, no,
not.
that was just a joke. He was
Oh,
working as a worker, and then he found the money.
okay. Okay, yeah. Now
He's
that
yeah.
makes a lot more. I'm like, he doesn't seem retired, right?
No, he was talking to the
To Woody Harrelson,
Harrison
yeah.
or Woody Harrelson character who was just pestering him about what he did. Said, "I'm retired."
Oh, right. Okay. So yeah, so he's presumably 50. Let's see, yeah, give or take, around there. He's working working job,
Hmm.
and he was willing to do whatever it took to get that payday that was never going to come,
Yeah,
from his regular
he's
nine to
probably
five job.
he's probably you know noticing that he's working slightly longer hours for slightly less pay,
Hmm.
and and he witnesses, and he just takes advantage of a situation that could help him.
Yeah, and I think that's the thing you were saying is that people, as the more the violence and all the things that are coming, that the sheriff Ed is talking about is the rising tide and willing, or people are willing now to do, like you said, do something they might not normally do. And obviously this movie is a heightened version of that. We don't expect people to find, people aren't going to find a satchel of money and kill their way to keep it, but you're willing to make choices that you might not have normally made. I
Yeah,
think is part of it
or
too.
or take increasingly more drastic risks.
Mm-hmm. One note that I had down, that why I sort of thinking about it now. So Llewellyn's wife, Carla Jean, in one point she mentions that she worked at Walmart, which I thought was
Yeah,
sort of it's sort of like a passing line in there, but I wrote it down because it seemed like a reason to have that line in the movie. She's working at Walmart, and I feel like that kind of encapsulates the death of
this,
unions, and this is now you're going to work
yeah,
a 9 to 5 job. Well, not 9 to 4 because they don't want to give you the 40 hours and pay you your
yep,
benefits.
yep. And it's clearly denigrating to Walmart to just assume that you're going to be impoverished if you work at Walmart, and they're the largest employer in the United States. So it's clearly a statement on the maybe maybe on the entire structure of capitalism, but more so on the uh, the greed of corporate America. Because it also it was corporate businessmen that had hired Anton Chigurh to
Yes,
pursue these violent means to get their money back.
yes, I wanted to touch on that too. That was another note that I had too, which is a good point. Is that I think you see the office building twice. Once
Yes,
when Carson, Woody Harrelson's character, goes and is tasked
Chigurh,
with to go find him, and then later when Anton comes and kills the, I guess,
the
one of
guy,
the main guy, and
the
it
executive.
executive, and it's sort of really perfect. I think you said it right. Is that at the top of all these people doing what they have to do to survive is some capitalist in a suit in a big tall building making decisions by just putting numbers on a page.
Yeah, creating mass death in order to get $2 million back.
Yeah,
And
I,
it's clever too, because they don't delve into any details on the corporation or on the executive or what they do exactly. The only other person from that corporation is just some nobody that's in the office that
right.
witnessed that guy get shot. And so it's a perfect blank slate for any company that you want to put in its place.
Exactly. It's just like the faceless corporation that's running, and especially given 1980 again, it's sort of the changing of giving corporations the ability to essentially exist without any real regulation. Regulations are completely starting to get cut in the
Yeah.
80s. and so they're able to do it, and it is kind of perfect that he comes in and he kills the lead, the leader or the CEO, whatever the guy is. But really, it's just it's a corporation is just a body with many heads. He can kill this guy, but it doesn't it doesn't do anything.
There's one thing I wanted to touch on right at the end when Ed is sitting at the breakfast table with his wife, and you can tell she's she's happy to have him at home, and taking comfort in each other's company, and he's clearly distraught, having just retired, and he looks disheveled and depressed, and he tells the story. He tells her about his dream, where he runs across his father in some snowy field, and they're riding horses, and his father comes up and passes him by, and he's carrying a fire and a horn, the way they used to. And he says, I know that when I get up to him, he'll have a fire burning there waiting for me. And that's kind of a prelude to the road, where in the book, the boy and the father and son always say to each other, we're carrying the fire, which is to say we're holding up the flame of humanity. We refuse to do desperate acts that will lessen us as human beings for the next generation. And I just think that's a really touching sentiment.
Yeah, so in a way, it's sort of like, the character, Tommy Lee Jones. I think we said before is that his father was also, in the same, did the same job. So it's sort of like the carrying the torch or the fire for the next generation. And he feels like he doesn't know how to do that, right? I mean, they don't say they have kids, right? Also, too, and not that matters.
He did have a daughter, but the only thing he said is we lost a daughter, but I don't want to. But I'm not going to discuss that.
Okay, I missed that.
But yeah, and so that goes into his own feeling of inadequacy when he says, "I feel unmatched," and then he goes on to talk about this dream where his father's carrying this torch on for the next generation, and he just feels like I'm not doing what I need to do to carry the torch further than him, because I quit, because I saw the changes and I couldn't hold up to him, and I quit. So he feels, like he lost his own humanity a little bit, and that he refused to carry it on.
I mean, it's hard to say that it's not that it's dishonorable or it's not honorable what he did. I don't think it's hard to blame him.
Yeah.
So
one person is that's also it. It goes into the individualism that we're all expected to uphold. Like, one sheriff isn't going to stop, the cartels and corporations and human desire to feel good. It's one man isn't enough. You need community for that. So of course he feels like the world is stacked up against him, and he doesn't have it in him to fight against it, because no single person does. And that's an unwilling expectation that we're all beset with.
Yeah. That kind of so I wrote a little kind of chart almost of, because I was looking, kind of like reading about other people's sort of thoughts about this movie, and I noticed in general, like the most every review in the most part was very positive. There were only a couple sort of negative ones. And one of the ones that I found where they're talking about the one negative review talked about how this movie, a lot of the characters sort of had this very nihilistic sort of sense. And I think you just kind of touched on it already by saying it's this individualistic mentality. Mm-hmm. You have an impulse to destroy. Anton's character is literally just destruction. And
Yeah,
even, Llewellyn isn't really looking to destroy, but he's willing to upend his entire life,
yeah.
for it. And
And,
so, yeah,
and at no point does Llewellyn reach out to anybody for help.
no, he doesn't seem to really have any support, right?
No, there's
Friends.
no community. There's no support. Even his wife uh, said to the sheriff when they were talking, um, she said she had called him to ask for help or whatever, and she said something like he's never once asked for help for anything, and like that's how we're expected to behave. That it speaks. It also speaks to Cormac McCarthy has a clear love for all things stoicism.
Mm.
Like he has a deep love for characters that embody that stoic kind of no nonsense mindset or whatever, where you're just gonna do what you're gonna do and just suffer through it. But that's also that also says a lot about how we as a country just expect everyone to carry their weight and the weight of the future coming down on them.
Yeah, there's never any real. I mean, with the exception, maybe you could say some groups, perhaps people on the left, realizing that you're not going to ever succeed or change anything with that mindset because 100 people doing their own individual tasks, they can each complete their own individual tasks, but collectively they have the power that's even greater. And like you said, I think this movie has sort of those three people in the movie: Anton, the sheriff Ed, and Llewellyn, who are all sort of individual actors. Where Llewellyn could have reached out to the sheriff. Obviously, he didn't kill anyone in this movie, right? I don't think he ever kills anyone. His only real crime is stealing this money that wasn't really his, but presumably he would have been okay. But like you said, he doesn't reach out for help.
Yeah, it was just there.
He just picked it up. Yeah, I mean, we didn't steal it. I guess you're right. He didn't really steal it. He found it. Found it
Yeah,
in
he just
quotation
wanted to
marks.
keep it. Yeah.
But I think the I sort of, as I was looking at that article, it also sort of talked about the sort of the opposite of the nihilistic, which I think plays into sort of Marxism in that sense of concern with moral ethics, whereas really no one in this movie really had any morals. I mean, Anton had principles, but he definitely
Yeah.
didn't have any morals.
No.
And so I think this movie and the characters, there is no moral authority or of any kind, even though, you have Sheriff Ed in the movie as presumably, not saying this is true, but you think of police as supposedly having this moral standard of laws of,
Yeah, now that I think about it, he really the the only morals that the sheriff stood for were it wasn't even morals, it was just a desperation to reach back to a romanticized past.
yeah, I think that's right. I don't think he either he abandoned his morals or I don't know if you could argue he never had them.
He doesn't do anything immoral,
No.
but that's I think that's largely due to him just largely being a witness and refusing to get involved in the world at hand.
Yeah, it's so funny in the scenes where the deputy Wendell will come and say like, "Oh, do you want to go back out to the crime scene?" And he says like, "Oh, is there another body?" And he says, "No." He says, "Well, I don't need to go out there."
Yep.
He doesn't.
Twice that happens. And then other time, the DEA agent's out there again. Are you going to go back out? He said, I'm fixing to try not to.
Yeah, exactly. He doesn't. he already saw, even if he didn't know at this moment the evil that was looming, or the
Yeah.
violence and all that, he already had made up his mind that he wasn't. He was because the other thing too is when they go to the crime scene initially and they're looking at all the weapons, like they're able to pretty easily know all the different kind of what happened. Like they kind of do it
Hmm.
in a pretty impressive manner. Like they kind of see what the shootout was. They recognize the two people in the suits that were sort of the other management-y type people. So they're
Yeah.
very smart, and they clearly have been seeing continued heroin, drug dealing, all this stuff, and they know all this. And he's still just like, it doesn't matter anymore. I can't. Maybe he does realize he can't stop anything anymore, and so what's
Yeah.
the point?
He's just a man. You know.
Yeah, he doesn't
I don't
have
know.
he doesn't have any power. I mean,
There's
really.
there's one difference between the book and the movie, and it's the sheriff is talking to Ellis, and he tells him, well, he's a war hero, the sheriff is, and he has a Bronze Star, and he talks to his cousin Ellis because he says the reason he got that medal was a complete lie. He was in World War II, him and his platoon or whatever company were in a house. The house got shelled. He woke up to all of his compatriots still unconscious. He went out, got a machine gun, and fought off a bunch of Germans. And then when night fell, he ran away because they're just going to come kill him. And the whatever, they make up a different story to make it sound like he was more heroic, like he stayed and fought and didn't abandon his compatriots. And so he says, like, this has been eating me away for the last 50 years or whatever. And he's like, what would my father have done? And that's that continuous reaching back to the past to compare yourself to people you uphold as something mythological. We worship what came before without ever really putting to test that worship.
I wonder if they left that out because it would somehow degrade his character,
Mm-hmm.
where you're meant to. I mean, obviously there's. I
Yeah,
don't
that
know.
would play.
It would hurt his character a little bit, don't you think?
Yeah, well, it plays out a lot better on page, I think, than in a movie, because yeah, you would think less of him, right?
Yeah.
Most patriotic Americans would.
Yeah. I mean,
With
just realistically, like that's another 10 minute, 5-10 minutes of an already long movie, and so who am I to say that's why they would do it? But I think it would give his character a little bit less um, cover.
honor,
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah, even that's a better word for it. For deciding to retire when he. I mean, he's an old, fairly old man. No one
yeah.
would really think, you know.
Twice about an old man retiring. Yeah,
Yeah. So, but then that's another sort of thing you think about with once the 1980s hit. I mean, maybe not quite yet, but the fall of the union and also the fall of having a penchant from a job you had worked for many years.
yeah,
That was starting to slowly be
really.
destroyed with privatization of 401ks and all that kind of thing. So he can retire and be comfortable, presumably as a sheriff at this time, but that's not something that's afforded to most people anymore now.
No, and that's the wave. That's the wave of desperation and violence that he's terrified of witnessing, and that's why he retires and can't put up with the changing times, because it all boils down to how many satchels can a person find in their life and not get killed?
Yeah, and I was actually just thinking, and you talked, I think you or we mentioned how Anton is sort of that violent streak, that sort of thing that's unpredictable. And I was just sort of thinking about his character in this movie as people sort of have to either, get out of his way, presumably, or if you do get into his way, you might die. And then there are also several characters like you're left with the sense of not knowing whether Carla Jean gets killed at the end. You also don't know if that other employee who says he's nobody in the
Yeah.
big office, but you don't know if he dies. So they leave this sort of ambiguity of some of those characters, which I like. I like that
Yeah.
not knowing kind of thing. But it makes me
And
think.
there,
Yeah, go ahead.
no, I'm sorry.
Well, I was just gonna say. So I feel like Anton's sort of, you could again. Maybe I'm over over analyzing it somewhat, but it's almost like the personification of the late stage capitalism that's coming for everyone, and you either can get out of its way.
It's the market, right? Where it will callously and with no emotion strangle you with handcuffs. But then, it might flip a coin and say, hey, well done.
Yeah, and that's sort of like a good personification of your chances. Like you could flip a coin, and you could when I don't want to say win the lottery, that's kind of extreme, but that's kind of what Llewellyn had done in this movie. He basically won a lottery
Yeah.
by pure happenstance, finds this money, and I think that's what many people were starting to see. Starting in the '80s, is that American dream of you can just easily have a decent job and have that pension and all these things, and now it's really just like the flip of a coin where that is going to happen.
Yeah. Yep. It's all up to chance. It's the chaos of the universe and then the added uncertainty of a free market. It'll rampage and flatten the world that you live in, but it'll also throw you a bone or two,
Yeah.
so you participate.
One thing I noted, this is sort of a non sequitur, but I noticed in the parts towards the end of the movie when they're going back and forth between Mexico and America, and I just found it sort of almost humorous in the scene where Llewellyn is wants to go into America, and the guard is sort of giving him a hard time, and he says he'd fought in Vietnam and they let him go through. But I just think of like the border as being this seemingly easily crossed.
First, yeah.
Yeah, they're just. I know it's obviously a different time, but there's like those drunk kids. The one that gives him, he buys the jacket from him, the shirt,
Yeah.
and they're just sort of casually walking across. Like, yeah, I'm just gonna
Yeah.
hop into Mexico. Oh, I'm gonna hop home, and
Yeah.
and it just was funny.
Yeah. I'm going to go next door to Mexico and have a good time and then go back home.
Right, exactly. You're in, exploit the things that you can there, and then go back home. And also, I also found it funny that the hospital care he received was in Mexico. Also, another little
Yep.
almost too perfect. He couldn't get health care in America, so he had to
Nope.
be in
No,
Mexico to get his free health care.
he made it though.
Yeah,
Yeah. This movie is great. I it's one of my favorites. I love Cormac McCarthy. The Coen brothers, I couldn't have picked better directors for it. It was just a lot of fun.
yeah. Thanks for joining again, Commie Trucker. Appreciate you talking about No Country for Old Men.
Yeah, anytime, man.
Awesome, awesome. Well, anyone out there, I know we ruined the end of the movie for you, but if you still, I still would say, I mean, as we always do here, the spoilers are welcome. But yeah, I definitely think, if you haven't seen this movie, you definitely should. It is, quite a
Yeah.
just from like a cinematography perspective alone, it's quite a good movie. And so,
Oh, I just also want to say Javier Bardem as Anton Chigurh was brilliant. His acting was incredible. He gave so much depth to this to this monster. It was incredible.
Yes, he
Like
was very good. I have to say, I feel like I think that Josh Brolin was good in his character,
Mhm. Yeah.
but like they're such different. It's almost like hard to create a character that is hollow because most people are not hollow, so it's
Yeah.
almost more challenging in a sense. I mean, I'm not an actor, I don't know for sure, but it would strike me as difficult to create that.
It's
That
a villain that you want to watch again, for
Yeah,
sure.
I think that's what makes him sort of the anti-hero because
Yeah.
you root against him, but then you kind of almost
Just
root
want to see him
for
more
him.
though.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. The old adage. But
Really.
yeah. So again, Commie Trucker, thank you for joining me, and for anyone out there, you can listen to the show on all platforms.